Hey Arjun, how's it going?
Hi, Vaibhav. I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
All right, great. I see that Kunal has also joined us. Hi, Kunal.
Hi guys, hi.
Hey Kunal.
Hi Vaibhav.
All right, we'll just give this couple more minutes for people to join in and then kick it off. All right, maybe we'll just get started. I'm sure people will trickle in as we move on. Um, so thanks everyone for joining us today for this workshop done by Pivot on how to break into management consulting. We have Vaibhav Pugalia and Kunal Ajmera joining us, both of whom have a lot of deep experience in this field, and we'll be sharing a lot of insights that are typically covered, in other workshops or other platforms, but also a few things which are typically not covered. So I'm really excited to have both of you here, Vaibhav and Kunal. Thanks again for making time for this. Just a little bit of intro about myself and what we are doing at Pivot. So I'm the founder of Pivot, which is a career tech platform. What we do is help people make smooth career transitions from one role or industry to another. And we do this in a couple of different ways, one of which is we connect you to industry mentors in your desired field for very personalized one-on-one guidance. And in fact, we have both Vaibhav and Kunal serving as mentors with us who have worked with other people and get them into the consulting field. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Vaibhav. Vaibhav, welcome again. And it would be great if you can maybe just share a little bit about your career trajectory so far so people know about your background.
For sure, thanks Arjun, and I hope I'm audible. Um,
Yes.
so I think firstly, I'd just like to thank Pivot. I think to invite me to have this session with all of you. A little about myself. So I grew up in Mumbai, India, and I moved to Singapore. As a lot of us do in India, I did my engineering. I moved to Singapore, went to Nanyang Technological University. And I think at Nanyang Technological University is where kind of more than the engineering side, I did a minor in business, and I really liked the problem solving in the business space that came with it. Um, did a couple of internships at global banks during my time at NTU, and decided to join Barclays, which is a UK-based investment bank in Singapore. Um, I was primarily in the risk and the finance functions of Barclays, and did that for around 3 years as part of a rotation-based program. And I think that was kind of where my inflection point was in terms of transitioning to consulting as a career, or at least a short-term career at that point. So I think at Barclays, I was very pigeonholed within the risk and finance field, and I was looking at, I was deeper within the function, but I wanted to understand how things work at the very top and how decisions are made, how strategic projects are driven. And from there, I wanted to get into management consulting. And at that point, I didn't think I had the skills to get into management consulting at that point. So decided to upskill myself with an MBA. I went to the University of Michigan. The business school is called the Ross School of Business. So did a full-time MBA for 2 years, knowing I wanted to get into consulting. And yeah, and I went through the interview process, and we can talk more about that. And wanted to come back to Singapore and joined Boston Consulting Group, BCG for in short, in Singapore. I did that for 2 years, primarily working with financial institutions in the Southeast Asia region on some of their strategic advisory, as well as a little bit more on operations as a generalist consultant for 2 years. At that point, I wanted to kind of again go a little deeper in more of a startup environment. And I very recently, actually 2 weeks back, transitioned to a fintech slash mobile gaming startup in Singapore. That's been my journey so far.
It seems like you've also made a couple of different career pivots in your trajectory. So we'd definitely like to get into some of that during this session. Kunal, welcome again. Thanks for making time for this. I know we had been discussing doing this workshop for a while, so I'm glad that we were finally able to put it together. Maybe Kunal, you can also just do a little bit of intro.
Sure. Pleasure's mine, Arjun. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Pivot for having me today. Pretty excited to talk to these guys that are attending the workshop today. Am I audible? All good?
Yes, you are. Although your volume is slightly low, Kunal, maybe you can speak
Let me try
closer to the
coming
microphone.
to my system. Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, better. Thanks.
Okay, great. So yeah, just to give you guys an overview, my career in management consulting, so to speak, started when I moved to the States. In 2010, I moved to the States to pursue an MS in biotech. And while my core lies in science and biotechnology and the life sciences, I decided to take a concentration in entrepreneurship and management, basically. So that's where I had my first foray into the management world and the C-level executive world. I did that for about 2 years, got some good exposure to management consulting. We had a club for aspiring management consultants. So while my core education was into sciences, I had mol bio and microbiology and your typical sciencey courses. On the side, I also made sure to sort of pursue my passion, which was management consulting. Did that for about 2 years. Right out of college, I went to the Johns Hopkins University lab. So I was actually on the bench doing hardcore research, hardcore test tubes and literal science stuff out on the bench. And I decided I had enough of it, to be very honest, because it wasn't for me. Very slow. That's when I decided to pursue management consulting on a serious career sort of basis. Reached out to a couple of mentors, reached out to a couple of professors, and they sort of told me that you need to start getting into the frameworks of management consulting and sort of start networking with some of your peers into management consulting. And that's when for about 8 to 10 months, I was only doing that on the back end. And I decided to, right about that time, I decided to move back to India. Interviewed with TCS, incidentally, my first firm that I interviewed with. And that's pretty much my journey. I've been with TCS since 2014 as a management consultant. It's been about 7 to 8 years now, and loving it, enjoying the journey so far.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Kunal. Very helpful. So, what's interesting here, and maybe we can use this as a way to kick off the session and dive right into it. What's interesting is the fact that a lot of people on the outside who are not aware of management consulting deeply, they would think that all management consultants are doing the same kind of work, right? It might feel that it's just strategy oriented work with a lot of large firms. Now, at a very high level, at a bird's eye view level, that definition might be true to some extent. But what I'm identifying, based on both of your careers as well as my own, I've spent about 9 years in management consulting myself before I started Pivot, is that there are a lot of different angles and a lot of deep layers to management consulting. So there are a variety of industries that one can specialize in, and there are different kinds of consulting firms that would do different sort of projects for their clientele. So maybe we can kick off by talking a little bit about the overall consulting landscape and where you think there is perhaps some sort of segmentation between the more general consulting firms, the typical McKinsey, Bain, BCG that cover the entire landscape and would focus on the more bread and butter strategy related work. And then you have slightly unique, differentiated or specialized players in the industry. Perhaps Kunal, your background suggests that you've been primarily specializing in life sciences. So that I worked at Mercer, which primarily specialized in talent management consulting. right? So, Vaibhav, do you want to share a bit of that, or how you see the different segments within the consulting landscape today?
For sure, for sure. So I think I would say one thing that kind of unites management consulting and consulting firms is that we exist because clients want a certain kind of problem solved, right? And how consulting firms are kind of segmented is based on the kind of problems that they're solving, right? So maybe I'll start with, because I have experience working with BCG. You have the likes of McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, also called the MBB, who focus primarily on strategic consulting, which is more so on a company coming in, the problem statement being, I am a petrochemical company, whatever, what should I do in the longer term? What should I do in the next 5 years, 10 years? How are the trends going to evolve? And can you suggest a viable path for me from a strategic perspective, right? So that's the bread and butter, although you'll also see that the MBBs have now kind of also evolved into having specialized fields such as data analytics consulting, people and organization consulting, as well as a lot of long-term transformation, right? So that's MBB in my mind. And then you have your other management consulting firms, which each have a certain value proposition for their clients. So one kind of consulting firm that comes to my mind is Simon Kucher, which really specializes in marketing and sales, specifically within pricing. So they help their clients, mostly retail and e-commerce clients, kind of get their pricing right, which is very important in that business. Then you have the likes of LEK Consulting, which also falls within that bracket, which has a very heavy focus on life sciences, right? So that I would classify as the second kind of category within the consulting firms. And then you also have the likes of the Big Four, who are doing more on the audit and the accounting side of things, working on advisory, but more so on the accounting and the audit side, right? And then I think the fourth bracket I would say is also the likes of your the TCSs and the Infosys, who are very heavily specialized in more so, from what I have experienced, tech implementations and driving the technology strategy from the strategy part to the execution part, and looking at it kind of end to end, right? So I would say those are the four categories that I've typically seen within management consulting firms.
Yeah, I love how you kind of just structured the whole landscape. Makes a lot of sense. Kunal, I think from your perspective, I would say you would generally probably agree with what Vaibhav has shared. My question to you is slightly, the next level here, which is, how does one actually decide which kind of a consulting vertical would make more sense for them? Whether it makes sense to go after an MBB, where things are slightly more generic in nature, more strategy-oriented work, or does it make sense to look at some of these other categories, the other three categories that Webb mentioned? How does one really decide that for themselves?
So, I think I'll sort of take off on what Vaibhav said initially, that the base of management consulting is essentially solving a problem, right? So in TCS, we look at it as a graph, right? There's an X and a Y axis. So on the one end, you have your different horizontals, which is management consulting, marketing, and your IT and tech support and blah, blah, blah. And on the other end, you have your verticals, such as, life sciences, oil and gas, etc. So what I see, the way I see management consulting is an intersection of the two, wherein, it can be applied to each and every vertical. So it can be, your life sciences, it can be tech, it can be oil and gas, anything that you can think of. So to answer your question, I think if someone wants to get into, management consulting, he or she would ideally have to start out by looking at what drives them, or what sort of base domain knowledge does one have, right? So for me, I have a very strong, life sciences background or a biotech background. So I possibly couldn't have gone into, say, fintech management consulting, or IT consulting or tech consulting. So the only out for me was to look at management consulting within life sciences and healthcare, right? So I think for anyone starting out, they should ideally, one, see what look at where their domain knowledge lies, or two, where their passion lies, and then sort of choose a particular vertical to get into.
On this specific question?
Yep, I think I agree with Kunal on how you can think through the kind of consulting you want to join. I would say the MBBs are typically, or at least the level I started and most people start off, is very generalist. So they typically move you into a specialized kind of industry or function only maybe 4 or 5 years into your tenure at the companies. So if you're I totally agree that if you know that say bioscience and biotech is your thing, or that marketing is your thing, then you would be better off finding a consulting company that specializes in that particular field, and your prospects at that company would be better because you would be able to kind of perform better. You'll get those kind of projects that you really like. If you're unsure, you can go for some of the generalist roles as well. If you know that you like to solve business problems, but you're not sure where to start, then a generalist role might be a good entry point to figure out where your kind of passion lies, and take it from there.
That you have to focus on is whether you're going to be more domain specific or you want to be more of a generalist. And the other thing to look at is kind of what drives you, as Kunal said, what motivates you in terms of problem solving, whether it's problems that are very niche level and you're okay with solving them on an ongoing basis, or you want a diversity of problems to deal with which are more general in nature. Would that be a fair summation of this, Vaibhav?
Yep,
yeah,
for sure.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the next topic here, which is kind of related to what we just discussed. But before we get into that, I just wanted to let everybody in the room know that we will be doing a Q&A session towards the end of this workshop. So please, guys, feel free to share any questions that you have for Vaibhav and Kunal in the chat section. We will be taking them up in the next 15 minutes or so. So yeah, with that, maybe we can segue into the next topic here, which is probably, I'm not sure about you guys, but I get that question a lot from people who are thinking about consulting. And it's about whether they need to go for an MBA or not. Especially in India, we have a typical mindset of whether a certain career path requires certain kinds of qualifications, and MBA is obviously something that almost every mid-20-year-old at some point considers doing in India if you're in the corporate field. So I understand, Vaibhav, you obviously have an MBA from Ross, and Kunal, you had a slightly differentiated background, even though you do have a master's. So would love to get your thoughts on what or how are the employers, how are the consulting firms actually hiring today in terms of looking at the qualifications and the credentials of the prospective candidates. Kunal, maybe we can start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question because throughout my career as well, I faced the exact same problem, and to break out of this is difficult by itself. When I realized that I wanted to get into management consulting, I had nowhere to start with. The only reason, and I tell this a lot to people, the only reason why companies, demand or rather prefer candidates with an MBA to get into management consulting is because there's no degree for management consulting, right? There's no master's in management consulting, or there's no bachelor's in management consulting. So the closest education that one can get to become a management consultant is to have an MBA, right? So when I was interviewing and when I wanted to get into this, someone told me a really good thing. You have to look at the base of what a management consultant does. And like Vaibhav initially said, it's essentially you solve problems. So you can easily demonstrate in your career, if rather you can demonstrate how you've solved problems, be it internally. You can be at a science. You can be on the bench doing hardcore experiments and solve problems, right? You can say reduce your costs, you reduce your operational costs, or you can have a different approach to solving a particular difficult experiment. So essentially what companies want to look at is your ability to solve problems. None of the companies, even though I know there are a ton of frameworks available online, and usually when people are interviewing to become a management consultant, they look at these 100 frameworks. Trust me, none of the companies actually want to see your ability in knowing these frameworks pat down. The only thing that they want to see is your ability to solve problems. So if you can demonstrate that in any way, I think you're pretty much good to go.
So there is no specifically one way to get into consulting. It's not like you need to 100% have an MBA degree to get into consulting. So Vaibhav, obviously, there was a reason that you went to University of Michigan and got your MBA from there, and then joined, BCG right after. I mean, I would love to understand your overall take on this, but also just if we were to personalize it to your journey, do you think that it would have been easy for you to get into a firm like BCG if you did not have a top MBA degree?
Yep. So I think this is also a question that I get a lot from prospective MBA applicants. How I see it is that there are 3 entry points into management consulting, right? One is, and 2 of them are kind of more out of school entry points, and the third one is kind of horizontally transitioning into management consulting, right? So the first is right after your undergrad, right, where you versus someone else, right? There is very little differentiation of specific skill sets. So I might be an electrical and electronic engineering undergrad, but if I'm able to show that problem solving in the interview process, they won't really differentiate me that much as compared to a business undergrad, right? If I'm able to prove my problem solving skills, my communication skills, and just my executive presence in general, right? So that's one entry point. The second one is similar to undergrad, but post MBA, right? So just like I did, for me, after I'd worked at Barclays, my specific skill was in the risk and the finance function, right? And it was very, very specific in terms of how should one kind of model the risk that financial institutions are taking? How should one calculate the income statement, the balance sheet requirements of how banks function, right? That wasn't for me a good enough sell in terms of doing more generalist management consulting, right? And that is why I decided for myself that I needed to get an MBA degree. That said, I didn't get the MBA degree primarily because I wanted to kind of get into management consulting. It was more of a longer term bet in terms of building those business skills, right? And getting that experience versus the short term view of getting into consulting. And I can talk about that a little bit more. The third one is what Kunal mentioned, right? You have a demonstrable history in delivering and problem solving in a particular field, or just a general strong problem solving history, right? That is the third approach, where you don't need an MBA degree. You can actually kind of do a bit of networking, get to the interview stage, and then generally after the interview stage, it's pretty democratic across candidates, right? So I would say those are the 3 entry points for me. I could have tried kind of getting into consulting right after my Barclays experience, but I think I also wanted to kind of get my MBA degree from a longer term perspective. I really wanted to kind of understand how those problems are solved at like a very management level, which was majority of my reason for doing MBA with the goal of getting into consulting. I would say those are the three entry points that one can think about.
Got it. Again, a very structured way to put it. So I think it's not 100% necessity to get an MBA degree to get into consulting, like you have pointed out, Vaibhav. There are multiple entry points. But at the same time, there might be certain roles within consulting which will have a hardline requirement for an MBA. So it seems like it's more of a case by case basis as opposed to a blanket approach that firms take today. Segueing to our next topic, which is related to some of the things, Vaibhav, that you were just talking about, which is, you went to a business school to actually understand, how management worked rather than just get into consulting. So obviously there are a lot of different skills that are applicable across the different consulting verticals. Kunal, for example, might be using very specialized science-related skills as opposed to more generalist consultant working on new market strategies and those kind of things, right? So let's say again, I'm somebody who is trying to break into the field. And there are different ways to break into the field. How do I structure my upskilling so that I'm able to showcase to my target firms that I would be able to deliver, from as soon as possible? So Kunal, obviously you had a slightly unique approach and journey in your consulting career. Uh, would you suggest that somebody with a specialized background, how do they actually showcase their skills to a prospective employer, whether they have a master's or not a master's?
So I think the first thing that you need to do is, tweak your resume, because, like Vaibhav said, post the interview, it's pretty much democratic, right? So your resume is the only way you're going to get FaceTime with your interviewer. So the first thing that you would need to do is tweak your resume to show that you're inclined towards management consulting, you're inclined towards business, you're inclined towards solving problems. And how to do that would pretty much be an entirely different story. But these would pretty much be the topics that you would need to cover in your resume to get even FaceTime with the interviewer to begin with. Post that, what you can do is prep yourself for the interview, prep yourself in trying to solve sort of the way we used to do it is, I used to just sit with a friend across. In our management consulting club, what we used to do is just, two people used to sit down and one of us would just come up with a problem, right? Something as simple as calculate the number of, or estimate the number of crows in India, alive at this point in time, kind of a thing. And then you would just sit across the table and brainstorm as to how one would arrive at the particular number. So that's another thing that you can do. A third thing that you can do is sort of keep networking across the board. In that sense, if you have a very specialized background such as mine, it's easier to get your foot in the door with respect to your prospective employer or your interviewer. So I think these things will be pretty important. To summarize, just tweak your resume, network, and upskill yourself in the background in terms of the frameworks and problem solving, pretty much.
Definitely very practical what you said, because ultimately these things are what employers are asking for at the time they're making hiring decisions. So it's not just, I think what you mentioned, Kunal, is not just about how to upskill, but it's also about how to actually land an interview or land a job finally. So that makes a lot of sense. Vaibhav, from you, what I think we can focus on is, what are these specific skill sets? We have talked about problem solving, communication. I think you had mentioned executive presence as well, right? A lot of these are generic in nature. So how would you suggest people go about acquiring and enhancing these skills? And are there any other skills apart from the ones that you and Kunal have already shared, which are must for consulting aspirants?
Got it. So I think the first and foremost, and I think that's the foundation, the foundation of problem solving, especially in the consulting world is to get the basics of business right. I think it is very important, especially from people who are not coming from a business background, to understand, very basic things like, how do you look at like cost and revenue, right? How do you look at return on investment? How do you look at time value of money? Like those are the bread and butter of making sound problem solving decisions. So I would say these should typically be available in any kind of good like business book if you want to do it on your own. I'm sure there are kind of courses online as well on how you can get the fundamentals of this, right? If you're confident, if you have a business bachelor degree, that's a different story. You can showcase it that way. So that will be very important when it comes to problem solving, right? So in terms of maybe I'll structure it in terms of first the skill sets that are required, right? So one is business problem solving, right? The second is communication, right? And I'll dive a little bit deeper into it. I think the third is it's kind of related to problem solving, but kind of especially for breaking into consulting is showing kind of achievement and impact, right? Which translates after you into management consulting to driving impact, right, for the client. So I think on the problem solving part, and of course, all of these things have one kind of the actual skills part, and the second is to demonstrate those skills through your resume and through your conversations that you have with people, right? So for problem solving, the actual skills part is kind of getting your basics of business right, practicing as Kunal was mentioning, just looking at problems and trying to structure them, looking at day-to-day problems and seeing how can you structure them better, what kind of data can you use to prove or disprove certain things, right? I think that muscle is very important to kind of get through the consulting interviews. So that's on problem solving. In terms of your resume, I think what you need to show through the resume is that you have solved substantial problems or important problems in your past life, right? And how you show that is, and I'm sure Pivot has some resume related workshops, etc. But how you show that is kind of showing the value that you have driven, right? So instead of saying like, I participated or I did some work, actually showing that, okay, I did some work by doing X, Y, and Z analysis, and it drove some, 1 lakh of revenue for the company, things like that. It is important to show. So that's on the problem solving part. On the communication part, I think, and I'm sure consulting companies have their kind of communication frameworks and best practices of communication up there as well. I think from a skill set perspective, trying to be as structured in your communication as possible, as well as kind of to the point and succinct, right? As well as being aware of who the audience is and tailoring your communication to the audience, right? And I'm sure there are a lot of kind of courses, YouTube videos around how management consultants kind of build that muscle, right? In terms of showing that on your resume, I think there's two ways. One is to show that you have worked with kind of senior people in the company. So for example, on my resume, I had worked with the chief operating officers across the group. So I kind of made it a point that I showed it because it shows that you've worked on significant problems. You have that executive level communication, and you've done that in the past, right? So that's on communication. And I think driving achievement also kind of links back to what I had mentioned on the resume. Through the entire interviewing process, you'll have to show that you have driven impact in the past, and that you are kind of curious, enthusiastic, and driven by driving that impact for clients or for customers, right? So I think those are the three kind of foundational skills. There's a lot of kind of teamwork, etc., that it needs to go in there as well. But most people through their corporate experience have that kind of teamwork experience typically.
Got it. Very helpful. So, we'll maybe take a couple of questions here that we have in the chat section from the audience. And some of them are quite related to the things that we have just been discussing with regard to upskilling and, just acquiring these core skill sets of problem solving, communication. So one of the questions here from Mahendra is if you both are aware of any good courses in management consulting, right? I think, Kunal, I think you had mentioned, or Vaibhav, you mentioned that the reason people go to business school is because there is no specific course for management consulting out there. At least not a highly accredited or very well-known popular global course, at least. But given that you have spent a lot of time in this field, have you come across any sort of courses that your peers or others within the field typically recommend that are helpful to strengthen your consulting muscles?
Kunal, you want to go first?
So, ideally, just going back to what I earlier said, the reason why an MBA is an MBA and why the interviewer prefers one to have an MBA is because it's the closest to, the skills that one would require in being a management consulting. Having said that, I particularly do not know of any courses that are tailored towards management consulting. But I'm sure if you do a quick search on a Udemy, I'm pretty sure there'll be some courses that are available in terms of problem solving or management consulting, and something that you can have on your resume. Back when I started my career, there was absolutely nothing of this kind. There was no Udemy, there was no online courses or anything of that kind that I could actually show on my resume. So I'm pretty sure that if you just go online, there'll be a ton of courses that one can take.
Got it.
Um,
Vaibhav,
I'll just maybe add on to that. So I think first is there might be some, like, I know there are these courses nowadays which is like, oh, the 7-day or the 1-month MBA kind of courses, right? Those might be good just to kind of get like an entry point into what they teach in MBA, just to get a sense of it. So I would say that is one. The second one I would say, and that's more kind of self-driven, is just pick up like one of the companies that you like, right? Just pick up like an investor report or their past year report to see what they have done, right? Are you able to kind of make sense of what they're saying? If not, maybe just Google that concept. Oh, how does this work? If they say that we increased, I'm making this up, but we increased customer retention by 20%. Do you know what customer retention is? How is it calculated, right? So that once you read through kind of multiple of those, you'll get a good sense of how those businesses function and what kind of metrics they look at. And once you Google those things that you don't know, then I think you'll automatically start strengthening that muscle a little bit, right? Third one is kind of related to the second one as well, is just being a bit curious of what is happening in the business world, and that typically comes from reading reputed business newspapers or magazines, right? That gives you a good view of the world of business. And personally, I think during the interview process, if you kind of internalize some of those things, right, interviewers do appreciate that you bring up certain examples that you read about, right? That's the third thing. A more tactical fourth thing is during so typically consulting interviews have a case study interview, right? So I personally, there's this website called Crafting Cases. They have like a 7-day kind of boot camp on how you can kind of structure problems, what are some of the frameworks, etc. And I believe it is free. I really kind of like the way that they were structuring their problems, but that is more so after you have kind of done those initial things of getting your fundamentals in place about business. So those are the 4 things I would say one can look at as a starting point.
Okay.
Just taking off on what, sorry, Arjun, I'd just like to add something really quickly.
Sure, yeah, please.
From what Vaibhav said, the first thing that I did was to subscribe to these newsletters. I went to Harvard Business Review and subscribed to their newsletter. I went to BCG, I went to McKinsey. They have these newsletters that they send out weekly. And that is a great resource, personally, because there's a ton of information on there which one can learn, and a ton of interesting stuff that they send out. So that could also be a great starting point, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean it's it's free and it takes no time to actually get a hold of it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you both kind of pointed out a couple of different ways to acquire these skills and just keep yourself generally informed about the business world. I think Vaibhav, you may have touched upon this. There are a couple of new agey, business school online business schools that are coming up, right? Which promise similar kind of outcomes from a student perspective. So they have decent placements, decent salaries, and all that, but it comes at a fraction of cost and time. Like in India, there's one that's quite popular today called STOA. STOA is not necessarily focused on just consulting, but they are positioning themselves as a competitor to a traditional business school, but really changing the whole model on its head, making it more affordable and less time consuming. I mean, these might be early days, so we can't say anything with full finality. But do you, Vaibhav, do you see that there is scope for these kind of alternative platforms to find success in placing people in consulting firms like MBB?
I think couple of thoughts on that. I think it is very difficult to replace that in-person MBA experience, especially if you're in like a global MBA program. You get a lot from the perspectives which are shared in the classroom as well. You get a lot from the background of your cohort and things like that. That said, I would say if you are kind of short on resources, right? It might be time. You don't have say 2 years to spend. It might be something like a family commitment you have, and if you don't have that basics of business in place, I think it doesn't hurt to go through that program and get a sense of it. The second thing I would say is that during the interview process, and this is not just consulting any other company, I think people will appreciate that despite kind of having those constraints, you went and did something like an MBA on your own, right? And that shows initiative, that shows passion of getting into that particular industry. So that way also it'll help. So I think those 2 points would be something. I think if you can spend some time in the evenings after work and things like that, it wouldn't hurt to get that kind of an MBA.
Right, got it. Kunal, you want to chime in?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much on board with what Vaibhav said. It's a great, ideally, it's passion at the end of the day. You just have to want it really hard. And, there aren't really structured courses, or there's no structure to being a management consulting that one. End of the cases, if you just demonstrate passion, you'll pretty much make it through. So.
Okay, got it. So next question here is kind of an interesting one, and I think maybe Kunal, you might want to answer that, because it's more around how somebody can transition into consulting at a lateral level without an MBA, right? So I think, what is the general appetite within consulting firms today to hire from non-B school backgrounds? And also, like, what are they exactly looking for when they make these kind of hires?
To make, I think, a successful transition, the one mistake that people usually make is when they move from a completely different domain, or rather a completely different horizontal into management consulting, is that they want to, number one, they want the best. So what they'll usually do is apply to the top fives, your BCGs and your McKinseys, and it's not going to work, because the one thing that you need to remember is that you're literally starting out afresh, right? Mm-hmm. And the other mistake that they one usually makes is having treating that shift as a promotion, or moving from one horizontal to another as say you want a 30% hike or 40% hike just to move to management consulting. You have to demonstrate as to what you can give to the company as well, right? You have to prove your mettle before companies can pay you an equivalent salary, or know your worth, ideally. So if you're moving, I'd say you keep your expectations low and be ready to sort of demonstrate that you're willing to make certain compromises before you make that shift, or even try to make that shift. Another way to sort of move into management consulting is to not go into these niche or boutique management consulting firms, as I like to call them. So there are a couple of firms which only do life sciences consulting, or they do only fintech consulting. In India, fortunately or unfortunately, we have these so-called tier two management level consulting firms. So your markets and markets. There's a popular one in Pune, wherein they don't particularly solve individual problems that clients come to them with, or they don't tailor their solutions to particular clients. Rather, they focus on belting out reports. So even if you go online and just search for, say, the market size of glucometers, for example, in India, and you'll instantly find 5 search results from Google, which will give you a report that you can buy. So they're pretty much syndicated reports. So I think firms of that kind are a little more receptive to hiring people that don't typically have a management consulting background. So if you're willing to make the switch, and if you really can't prove yourself and you can't really break into your top level or high level management consulting work, I suggest you go this sort of syndicate market research or syndicate management consulting route.
That's very interesting. A unique perspective. I think we are aware of all these kind of different management consulting firms, but somebody that has this kind of unique value proper offering, which is so different from most of the other consulting firms. That's interesting. We have a similar question, but perhaps we can personalize it more because it applies to one of the people in the audience, which is Amar. So Amar's question is that he has 15 plus years experience in IT sales, not in a technical field. Is there a path for him to get into general consulting and strategy? So if, let's say, I'm Amar, I'm asking you this question, what would you tell me?
Got it. I think firstly, anyone does have a path of getting into general consulting and strategy. What I would say is, because there is significant experience in the IT sales field, I would, and if of course that is, if say Amar is looking for a switch, right, away from the IT sales field, then that would require a bit of reskilling and retooling, which an MBA. Okay, he already has an MBA. Okay, got it. So I think that'll require a bit of retooling and reskilling, which can be done outside of work hours. It'll be a bit of a stretch, but that can still be done. What would be a bit easier would be to get into. So I know that the likes of BCG, Bain, McKinsey, they have a marketing and sales practice, right? And they definitely do advise the IT industry, right? So that said, and the third thing is, all consulting firms, regardless of who they are doing some kind of sales, right, and selling projects to clients, right? So I think those three areas could be typical areas to explore, and where those core skills that Amar has developed over time may apply a bit better. So I think that could be two kind of routes to go about it.
Yeah. Also, is there, apart from reskilling, retooling, do you feel like there is a specific way to kind of reposition his background or his potential in resume and in interviews, so that it's easier to communicate this story that hey, I have this slightly differentiated background and I'm trying to make a transition, but here is why I think I'll be successful and how I can add value. So are there some things that he could do from a resume or interview perspective?
For sure. I think I remember my first year of MBA, the first 15 or 20 days of the whole interview cycle we spent on just getting the messaging on the resume right. So I think regardless of who the person is, that story needs to be very clear. The clarity in the points, the impact should come out really well, right? I think specifically for Amar, what I would say is that it can be easy to think that I'm in IT sales. These are the three things that IT sales does. But if you actually dig a little bit deeper and kind of introspect on some other projects that you've taken, specific instances where you have worked with, say, a challenging client and how that played out, if you are able to showcase kind of increasing revenue for the company, so you have deployed certain strategies personally that increase the amount of sales, right? You can try and bring those aspects out in the resume, and not think kind of linearly to say that okay, IT sales, I sold X amount, or I sold X number of licenses, or whatever it might be, right? So I think it does require, and this is for everyone, I think it does require a lot of introspection. There are some ways, there are some best practices in terms of how you position it on your resume, but it definitely requires a lot of introspection in terms of getting that messaging right and digging a little deeper into your experience to get a hold of some of those achievements.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Amar just had a follow-up question, which is something, we kind of face from people who are making any kind of career transition. A lot of times when people have a different background than the one they are aspiring for, they feel like, they'll have to start all over, right? Which can sometimes be the case. And, we do, like, we can't give false hope or promises that, yes, you can start at a lateral level. Sometimes you just cannot. Um, but what we do also focus on is the future career trajectory, right? Because what you might be having in your current career as a future potential might be very different than what you might have in a new industry, right? So sometimes taking a pay cut or taking a position cut actually works out well for you in the mid to long term. But that's just our general perspective for consulting and other fields as well. What would you tell Amar, Vaibhav, like in this specific case?
Um, so I feel as compared to industry roles, and Kunal, correct me if I'm wrong, compared to industry roles, consulting has a very kind of defined structure of roles in terms of the levels, right? And you typically kind of come in at a more junior level than you expect, I would say, right? This is just from a role perspective, right? So you'll probably see, if you come in at a, say, a consultant level at BCG, right, you'll probably see, fresh MBA grads kind of with you as well. But your experience still does help there, because your growth in, if you're able to kind of perform to that level, is faster than the less experienced folks, right? In terms of pay, I don't think it is a pay cut as such. It might feel like a position cut, but typically most of the consulting companies will either take you at the same salary or give you a hike, right? Because they want you to be in a zone where you can actually perform, right? You're not regretting the decision, and you're not thinking about the pay cut that you took, right? So from a pay level, I would think it would not be lower. From a role level, I feel like it's a parallel hierarchy that consulting has. And there are only some levels where people come in laterally, unless you have uh, you have kind of been like in IT sales, as you've been for a long time, and kind of grew up to be like, say, director, managing director of IT sales. Then you might come in at a more senior level in a consulting firm as an IT sales advisory specialist, or in that kind of a role, right, where you are advising specifically clients who are in IT, in the IT industry, I would say. So I think, yeah, those are some of the points I would think of.
Well, there's a related question here from Garima, which is, as you can see, if you have perceived any specific pay gap between a lateral hire who has masters, which kind of applies to you, Kunal, versus a typical MBA candidate. I mean, salaries are not always transparent within consulting firms, but you may have a general idea of the different brackets at different level. So do you think there is a specific pay gap between these two different kinds of profiles?
So it's not very easy to answer this question. As you rightly said, Arjun, the salaries are not very transparent to begin with, and more importantly, like Vaibhav said, roles are pretty much roles, right? So they don't necessarily reflect, at least in India, your role particularly doesn't reflect the kind of work that you're doing. The role is only meant, your title is only meant to tie you down to the corporate structure or the structure that a company might have. So, if you're to look at, your typical consulting journey, you'll probably start with a research associate, move on to an associate, then an analyst, and consultant, and then a management consultant, and then a principal consultant. But it really doesn't, sort of reflect upon what the kind of work that you're doing. So if I were to answer, whether there is a pay gap between someone with relevant experience versus an MBA candidate, I don't know. I think ideally, if you were to put it in terms of absolute terms of and compare apples to apples, I would think there would be a pay gap, given that most companies prefer having an MBA versus someone with with a general master's. Again, it depends on the kind of role that you're applying to, right? So if the role demands that one have an MBA, a person, a candidate with an MBA is automatically going to get offered a higher salary.
Makes sense. I think it's also not just an either or sort of switch on, switch off sort of an answer, right? You really need to have more context with regard to which firms you're applying to and exactly what your background is. But yeah, I mean, I would say, like, generically speaking, what we have seen is obviously there are tiers of candidates today in the typical management consulting landscape from a firm standpoint. So yes, your IIMs would, and especially IIM ABC would get a higher pay package than somebody who is not from that background, assuming everything else is the same, right? So, I mean, those kind of things are easy to answer, but things get complicated when you dive into the specific firms and then the specific profiles of candidates. There are a couple of other questions that we have here, and I've kind of identify a pattern amongst them. So there is Prekshit and I believe Khatia, both of whom have shared their specific backgrounds. Prekshit is working at a rating agency as a financial analyst and pursuing CFA level 2. And Khatia has a CA background, right? Both of them are considering a transition into management consulting. And I think while we have touched upon this, multiple times during this session, is there kind of a wrap all answer, something that would apply to everybody with regard to how they can actually switch into consulting? Vaibhav, you want to take this?
Yep. I think it kind of comes back to what is. I mean, it's like how startups need to have like a particular, say, intellectual property or some kind of edge or competitive advantage, right? I think it comes down to what kind of experience and skill set you have, realizing, that firstly, does that align with kind of what you want to do? If you want to switch completely, then I would say an MBA might be a good way to go. Most people who come to an MBA are career switchers, so an MBA might be worth doing. If you think there are consulting companies out there where you can actually apply your current skill set and that's what you want to do, I would say kind of do that process of getting kind of the basics of business right, reading up a little bit about consulting, what they do. Networking is a very big part of breaking into consulting. So network with the right people, try and get in touch with people just to, who are already in there to kind of understand their experience, what they do, what kind of problems are they solving, to stand out. I would say that would be the way to go. Career switching, most likely you'll need an MBA.
Yeah, got it. And Kunal, I think again similar question, but maybe you can either just echo what Vaibhav said or add to it based on what you think. Harish has an analytics consulting and delivery background with 7 years of experience. With these kind of credentials, do you feel like there is a potential for him to get into management consulting? And again, would you recommend the MBA route or something else?
So I think, what I would say is that do what's easiest to get into it, right? So while there's not one straight answer. If you think, or if the roles that you want to apply to demand an MBA, and that's the shortest, go for the least path of resistance. Just if an MBA is the best way to get into management consulting, do it. If for me, for example, like a TCS, they didn't want an MBA. They just wanted to, the guy interviewed me for maybe 3 hours on end, and he just wanted to see how I can problem solve. So it all boils down to how badly you want to become a management consultant. And ideally the skills that you need to have, like you said, there's a pattern into people asking as to what skills one requires to be a management consultant. So my answer is you need to become what a management consultant ultimately does, right? So if we're talking about tweaking your resume, you're tweaking your resume in a certain way. You're showing your presentation skills. That's what's required in a management consultant. You have to show how you can present data in a better format. If you're communicating your communication skills in an interview, they want to see your communication skills. If you have good communication skills, you can become a good consultant. That's what the interviewer wants to see. So, all in all, just be the person that a management consultant is. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to add to what Kunal said, I think for having that experience already in analytics consulting, right? I think that a lot of analytics consulting is what a lot of management consulting firms are doing as well. So, for example, I can tell you about BCG. BCG has this specialized business called BCG Gamma, which is specifically for data analytics kind of projects, right? So things like how do you look at all the data of a bank and improve the life insurance kind of selling rate, right? So those kind of projects exist as well. And I think from what I've seen, there is kind of a bit of a gap in terms of getting that skill set in for consulting companies as well. So I think that should be one of the skills that should be in kind of higher demand, I would say.
Got it. I know we are closing in on our finish time here, but I just wanted to see, Vaibhav, Kunal, if you just maybe have another minute or two to wrap things up. That's okay? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm good. Yep.
Great. So I think we just have one more question here from Anam, and it's mostly around the work-life balance and the type of workloads that exist today. There has been a lot of talk about the crazy hours that go on, especially at the junior to mid levels for management consulting firms. Is that still true today? Should people still be wary of not having a great work-life balance at firms? Vaibhav, you want to go?
Sorry.
Yep, I can go first. I would say from what I've seen in the Asia context, it is typically true, but I will caveat it by saying that it's a lot of work, but generally it is, if you enjoy the work, it is actually, very, very good and very needle moving work that you're doing. So I think there is that grind, but if you enjoy that process of problem solving, if you enjoy getting out of kind of pitching to like a senior executive on what they should be doing based on kind of your problem solving skill set, and you get that rush from it, then I think it's a great place to both create impact as well as to learn. So I would say typically true, but fulfilling as well.
Kunal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much echo what Vaibhav says. Love what you do, because if you don't like what you're doing, you're going to crumble under the pressure. It is high octane, it is high sort of high dynamic work. So if you don't like what you do, you're going to crumble under the pressure because you have to deliver. I personally used to take pride in the fact that I'm helping problems in the real world. And when they would launch products, that would drive me. So if you don't like what you do and if you don't have a passion for it, don't get into management consulting. You're going to crumble very soon and you're going to burn out very soon.
Just to add to Kunal's point, I just got reminded of one thing. I think not just management consulting, I think just generally managing and prioritizing work becomes very important. True for other roles as well, but more so for consulting, right? Are you able to kind of say that this 2 hours of work is not needed, we can do it, we can just we don't need to do like 2 hours of analysis, we can show like this metric and that'll be okay, that's proof enough for someone to buy into it, right? So those kind of things you need to do very ruthlessly, otherwise it can get a very kind of long grind. And of course consulting firms typically teach you and train you on how you can do it better as well. So I think that is one thing that kind of needs to be done.
Got it. All right. I think that sums it up for today. Thank you so much, Vaibhav and Kunal, again, for making time for this. I think we covered a lot of ground, but there is still so much left. I feel like a lot of the insights that were shared ultimately get very personalized at an individual level, depending on the context, right? So I think with that in mind, what I want to share with the audience is, Vaibhav and Kunal are both mentors on Pivot, and they help people by providing very personalized guidance on your specific career transitions and questions related to upskilling, networking, growing your connects within the field, and ultimately, the more practical questions when you are going for job search and consulting with regard to positioning your resume, and preparing for interviews and case studies and those kind of things. So if you are interested in getting their one-on-one support, I would suggest going here to this URL for WebHub, and for Kunal as well. We have a URL where you can book one-on-one sessions with them at their availability, and see how you can potentially benefit from their experience and insights from this field. But thanks so much, Kunal and Vaibhav again. Any last thoughts that you want to share?
You want to go first, Kunal?
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. Thanks for having us. I think it was a fun session. Really enjoyed sharing my insights with people. I just want to sum it up by saying have fun in whatever you do.
Yeah,
awesome.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I think it can feel like a lot of different moving parts, but once you approach something like breaking into management consulting, kind of just have a structured approach, be patient, trust your skills, trust your experience, and I think you can kind of break and don't take too much tension. I would say have fun. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to summarize this on a late Thursday evening. So thanks for that. I'm also just sharing the URL for our website for people who are considering a career transition. So feel free to check that out. And yeah, thank you again for everybody who was able to join. We will reach out to you with a recording of the session so you can watch it in your free time. And with that, yeah, we are going to wrap this up. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.